Good afternoon. A warm welcome. Thank you very much for coming today to the lecture by our distinguished visitor, Stan Lai. It gives me great pleasure and a huge honor to introduce him. Stan does not need much introduction, but I nevertheless wanted to take the opportunity to read to you the highlights of his impressive CV. Stan Lai is a co-founder of the Performance Workshop in Taiwan and the Wuzheng Theater Festival in China. In 2015, he opened his first theater, Theater Above, in Shanghai. After graduating with a PhD in dramatic arts from UC Berkeley, the world's second best public university. You all know what the best one is. He has been amazingly productive. He has produced 30 original plays, 2 feature films, and 4 operas, including the most recent one being the San Francisco Opera's production of the Chinese classic Dream of the Red Chamber, which he co-produced with our very own CCS faculty, Sheng. So according to the BBC, Stan Lai is the best Chinese language playwright and director in the world. And in my humble opinion, I don't quite agree with this description because I think that Stan is one of the best playwrights and directors in the world, period. He doesn't even need the prefix of Chinese language. So it gives us such great pleasure to have him here. I thought I should also highlight that although Stan is described, his occupational title is playwright and director, I sort of resent these occupational titles because when you have someone who is so incredibly creative like Stan, these titles are too small of a box for him. So in addition to being a world-renowned director and playwright, Stan has in fact done a lot of other things. In addition to his accomplishments in theater, he has translated a number of famous Buddhist books with his wife, Ding Naizhu. This includes Matthew Ricard's The Monk and the Philosopher and Happiness. And it really puzzles me how he manages to find time to translate these books in addition to all of the things that he's really doing. So on top of that, which is the topic of his lecture today, Stan is also the author of a best-selling book in creativity, which is published in Chinese. And this is a really rare and fabulous opportunity for us to hear about his ideas on creativity in English for the first time in Ann Arbor. And so I'm truly excited to have him here. And there is perhaps no better person to moderate this discussion with Stan than our very own CCS faculty, Professor Sheng. Bright is a composer, a conductor, and pianist. He is a Leonard Bernstein Distinguished University Professor at University of Michigan. And he has many accomplishments. In 1999, he received a special commission from the White House to create a new work for the state dinner hosted by the president. In October 2001, Sheng was named a MacArthur Fellow. He was also invited to compose music for the opening ceremony for the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and he had collaborated with Stan to create the Dream of the Red Chamber. So it gives me wonderful pleasure. I have the best job of introducing 2 of the most creative individuals on campus and perhaps in the world. So please join me in welcoming Stan and Bright.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very honored to be here. I've had a wonderful 4 days in Ann Arbor, discovering what a treasure this place is. And of course, the treasure is all in the people. So with great pleasure, I'm going to talk to you today about something that's been on my mind for a long time, because as a creative artist, we work at our work every day, And at the same time, actually, I was a teacher. I've taught for 20 some years at the National Taipei University of the Arts, and also found the time somewhere to be Dean of the College of Theater and all that administrative stuff that you have to do. While I was doing all my creative work, in which I don't teach anymore, I haven't in a while, but being back here, this semester I'm at Berkeley, the second most renowned public university in the world. Yeah, okay, I'll take that, I'll take that. Where I got my PhD, where I learned my craft, where I learned a lot, and I'm giving back to them by making a new play there called A Go, and I'm sort of teaching the students how I do it. Hopefully they can learn how to do it, while at the same time teaching creativity at lectures on creativity at Berkeley. Because as an artist, we learn and we have breakthroughs in how we create things, and that's a very individual process. But as a teacher, how do we teach creativity? And you see, all of the books that I was seeing about creativity somehow did not satisfy me, because I felt that when we're talking about things like thinking outside the box, brainstorming techniques, these seem to be able to enhance your creative abilities if you're faced with a problem that needs a solution. Okay, now what I want is creativity itself. Okay, it's not the technique to be creative to solve a problem, but where do we have the creative ability to even think of the problem? All right. So if you think that Einstein was very creative with his solution to the question, what was the question? That was the real creative moment, when he thought of the question that led to E equals mc squared. That is the real creativity that I'm interested in. It happens to me sometimes, not on the scale of Einstein, but it does happen to me. And for many years, I thought, like perhaps all of my teachers, that this was something that you're born with or you're not. You have it or you don't. My own students, when they came to me, I felt that if they had it, I could enhance it. If they didn't have it, it wasn't my job to give it to them, because that's not what we do, and that's not what we know. So one year, I had a breakthrough, and this breakthrough led to the book. So let me just quickly take us through. I think I found a quote from William Blake, the great poet and painter. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite, beautiful, profound, and absolutely creative, and absolutely pertinent to my thoughts on creativity. So, how can we get creative? Can creativity be taught? Are we all creative, or aren't we all creative anyway? These are questions that went through my mind in all my years of teaching. So, let's start with definitions. Perhaps one of the most notable scholars on creativity at Harvard, Teresa, I believe her name is pronounced Amabile, I'm not sure. She said, in a podcast, she said that creativity is simply novelty that works. And she said, she's making it very simple, very, very simple. And that very simple definition to me, I think, would not even satisfy her, okay, from what I've read of her works. Because novelty that works is creative. Well, novelty that doesn't work often is also very creative, okay? So I turn to Robert Sternberg, also a very noted scholar in the field. I like this definition: the ability to produce work that is both novel and appropriate. So he's got two criteria for creativity. So novel, that's the same as novelty. That works, well, appropriate. You must be appropriate to the task, all right? So if we say that we want to prepare a special lunch buffet, and then someone brings a car. Okay, wow, how creative is that? We put out a car for a buffet. Sorry, it doesn't work because you can't eat it, okay? It's not appropriate to the task. So the reason I use this, you'll see why, because soon I'm going to be showing you how creativity should be split up into two different domains. We can call it the task and the resolution, or the topic and the solution, or inspiration and execution. Sometimes simple as ABC, sometimes simple as A plus B. Okay, so creativity can be as simple as A plus B, because all that creativity is seeing connections between things. All right, and if we're creative, we see connections all the time. In thin air, we see these connections. A plus B, that's as simple as this thing. This is what? This is a pointer that also has a laser beam. That's A plus B. This is a creative thing. I mean, you wouldn't have seen this thing before. And how the hell does it connect to that? It's beyond me, you know. So this is a very creative gadget here. But we're talking about simply, let's say, like this bottle of water here, and this cell phone here. Can we make a cell phone that looks like this? Of course we can. That's A plus B. That's creativity. Will you buy it? Okay, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to buy a cell phone that looks like this, but you'll start to see what I'm saying. When someone, I believe it was Casio was the first, I'm not sure, whoever first put a camera onto a mobile phone, I remember it was in the 90s. And when that happened, I was saying, is that the most stupid thing that you could possibly do? Shows you how much I know, right? Because I thought, who would want to take a picture when they're on the phone, right? Yeah, right. So, but that's just A plus B, isn't it? A water town and a tourist place like Wuzhen in China, plus theater, becomes the Wuzhen Theater Festival. Is that simple enough? That's very creative. This is the festival that I helped found in China, and has quickly become the most important festival in China, some people say in Asia. Crosstalk plus theater, 相声 plus 戏剧, becomes what people call the 相声剧, people call a crosstalk play, which people had never seen before. This was my first professional production in 1985. And a friend of mine made it into an audio cassette, and that was also something very creative. It did very well. Sold 2 million copies. They said the pirated editions sold even more. So that's creative too, okay? The pirates are also very creative. Tragedy plus comedy, Secret Love in Peach Blossom Land. Theater plus film, Secret Love plus in Peach Blossom Land's theater piece made into a film, The Peach Blossom Land, which was screened a couple of days ago at the State Theater. This is all very, very creative stuff. Theater plus a garden. This is a play I did last year at the Huntington Library in Los Angeles. So incorporating theater into the landscape of the garden. Okay, let's get a little frivolous now. If we say A plus B, so shoe plus umbrella. These are for real, okay? These are real. Okay, so it's novel and it's appropriate, right? Okay, let's say the task is you're always sleepy during lectures, okay? So noodles are always too hot. These are the famous useless Japanese inventions you can find online. Yeah, they're very, I love them. I love them because they're so useless. And so sometimes I guess we have to, we're too serious about life, and so to make something totally useless is not easy, I must say. So it's good. Okay, let's get a little more serious. Let's say Picasso. Let's say an object plus different viewpoints spliced together. And that's Cubism. Okay, so A plus B equals something creative. It's that simple. But of course, it's not simple. You want to be Picasso, you need so many years of classical training to be able to make this breakthrough and do what he did. Okay, so to understand creativity, we need to focus on what really happens in that moment of creativity. And so this leads to the essential question of what is inspiration? And that leads to the essential question of, does creativity come from without or within? Okay, because the common mythology is that creative artists or inventors or scientists, the inspiration comes to them from, the muses or something, or someone outside. I'd like to compare notes with Bright when he composes music. Where does it come from? So let's say we have a quote from William Blake again. I myself do nothing, he's saying when he's writing or he's painting. The Holy Spirit accomplishes all through me. This is what he feels. Puccini on Madame Butterfly, the music for this opera was dictated to me directly by God. So Puccini was like an HP printer, just printing out the notes, okay, to be shared with the public. Myself, I wrote this for the program for A Dream Like a Dream when it first came out. A Dream Like a Dream is an 8-hour play of mine that has the audience in the middle, and the theater, the play revolves around the audience for 8 hours. And it's a very complicated work, and I'm not a narcissistic author. I don't want to spend too much time on my own work here, but I think it's a very good example because I know what happened when I wrote this play. So there's no guesswork. I know what happened. What gushed onto the paper were characters and events that had accumulated in my mind over a long period of time. This is what happened to me when I wrote this play, when I wrote the outline to this play. So I think that takes a little explanation. This is what it looks like. And we perform it every year. It's still going. So the reason why it's so long is because the whole idea is that to really understand a person, you must understand other people connected to this person. So the play goes from one main character to another, to another, to another, and goes from in space and time from Taipei to Paris to Shanghai 100 years ago, and then to Paris 100 years ago, and then back to Taipei, back to Shanghai and Taipei. So then after 8 hours, you figure out what happened to everyone. So the first lines of the play are, in a story someone had a dream, in that dream someone told a story. And just a couple of shots from the production, you can sort of feel the complexity of it. Now, that first line came when I was standing in front of this painting in an exhibition in Rome in 1990. And as you see, this is a painting about paintings. Look at all these paintings. And I stood there, and there are many of these. This is a kind of a genre that painters paint a patron's collection, let's say, and they paint it all, you see them all. But when I stood there, in my mind, I just thought, oh, in a story, someone had a dream, in a dream, someone told a story, and I wrote that down as my sort of translation or my take on this painting. I put it in my drawer, and it didn't see the light for 10 years. So the next year, there's a very special lake. Actually, it's not a lake, it's a river in Bhutan, where in the past, historically, some special teachers have, from the water, taken out burning objects that have teachings in them, believe it or not, the mythology, the stories around it. And so it is said here that you can, if you are quiet and you observe the water, you can actually see many things. So my wife and I, we sort of crouched ourselves onto a boulder and gazed into the water the whole afternoon and saw nothing, okay? But we did that. It's something we did. and something we did and was in my mind. In 1999, we went to this chateau in Brittany. We saw this, I saw this portrait here, and it said, so-and-so, Henri so-and-so, French ambassador to Italy, 1860 to 1900. So he lived only 40 years. And I just stood there, I stood in this exact place and looked at the painting and thought, oh, so this is his house, okay. He was a diplomat. My father was a diplomat. My father also didn't have a very long life, so interesting. And it wasn't like, wow, I had some sort of enlightenment at that moment. No, it was just simply just, as you see, if you go somewhere and you see something interesting, that was it. And then I started thinking about some other things, and then my wife patted me on the shoulder and said, dinner time. So that was it. So these little things that happen, including a train wreck in England, a patient in New York, things I read, things that came to me in the newspaper, in the New York Times, until one night in India, I needed to write a play because my school needed me to do a play, so I had to write a play. So the pressure was growing. And suddenly one night, all these separate things, and there's many, many more that I don't have time to tell you about, they all came together into one place, and that place was called A Dream Like a Dream. So it was as if all these characters and all these situations, they fell into place. And I knew in my mind this was something very complicated. So I jotted down a couple of notes. And the next day I went to the stupa and sat there and wrote the outline for this play, which turned out, when I got back home in Taipei, it took 29 pages of A4 paper. So normally a play of mine is 3 pages for 2 hours. So 29 pages I knew was a very long play. So anyway, what I'm saying is simply that that incredible moment of inspiration in India that night, it happened. But everything that assimilated itself in my mind was already there in my mind. This is what I want to point out. It didn't come from somewhere in space. I wasn't suddenly able to speak a foreign language or some alien language. These were all things that happened in my mind. They were files that were extracted from my mind and then put together into a new file. It was like putting strangers into a room and suddenly they all were relevant to each other and they made sense. And I think when I say that, I am explaining a lot of what happens to creative people, particularly screenwriters, film writers, playwrights. This is what happens. Different characters occupy the same space and suddenly make sense. They make a story. This is what happened to me. So that's basically where I wrote the play. So what we're talking about are files, and then let's call it an app that we must have, a creative app that can extract the files, knows where they are, knows which ones to extract, and put them together. Okay, that's what we talk about when in the moment of inspiration. So this leads to this question. What kind of app do we have, and what kind of files can the app pull from? Okay? So if we have a lousy app or we don't have the app, then we're not creative. Because we don't have anything in our minds that can pull files, then put them together. A cannot plus B, all right? Now, if we don't have any worthy files to pull from, then our computer mind is also worthless as a creative person. So we need to think about what files we keep stored. And that also is, just think about it. I mean, how do we store files? We don't even know. We don't even know how we remember things, and some things we don't remember. Why are we deleting things from our files? Why do we neglect things that we obviously see, and then we don't even register them? Today, maybe 5 files are left in your mind from a day. I don't know. I haven't done the math on that, but these are the two things we need to think about. Okay, so what is inspiration? I was reading a book when called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying when the inspiration came. The book itself was not inspiration. The book itself was a catalyst. So all of the elements that flowed were already stored. So to make it clear, your app cannot pull files that are not stored there in the first place. Your app cannot pull files from the thin air. So we need to cultivate our app and we need to be mindful of our files. Next, that's the first important thing you need to know about creativity. Next, the next year I was back in India. And by the way, if you've ever been to Bodh Gaya, you know what I'm saying. It's an incredibly creative place. It has creative energy like no other place in the world. If you need to write a play, I strongly suggest you go to Bodh Gaya. Okay. I was thinking about teaching. And suddenly, I had a breakthrough. And the breakthrough comes from, I jotted it all down on this postcard. I read some lines from a Buddhist scripture that said, and this applies to all learning in all things, and that is that you need wisdom and you need method. They were talking about Buddhist practice. For the practice, you need wisdom, you need method. Meaning, if you are a monk and every day you're just chanting mantras, but you don't think about the wisdom of the mantras or what you're actually doing, you can only progress to a certain level. Or if you're talking about emptiness and Buddha nature all the time, but you don't do your actual practice, you don't sit and do meditation, you are also limited. It makes sense for any discipline. Let's say you're a businessman. You have an MBA. Well, certainly you have the method to manage a company. But do you have the wisdom of business itself to be a CEO, to really make decisions, to really know what's going on? Right, I think often of, let's say you have the fingers to do Bach, the unaccompanied solo sonatas, but you don't have the wisdom, then we're not going to listen to you, okay? Because I think computers can play faster than your fingers, so we can listen to the computers too. So, education and creativity should be in two different domains. One is called method and one is called wisdom. So we split them up. And what we do nowadays is only method. That is a trap that our educational system has gone into, is we only do method. So let's see what I'm trying to set up here. Two domains for training and creativity. One is what we normally do on the left, on the right-hand side here. And then the other domain, wisdom, where do we learn it? We learn it in the domain of life. Wisdom and method are the two things necessary to be successful in the practice of practically everything, but we emphasize only method. So may I ask, does Ann Arbor, do we have a Wisdom 101? Do we have a College of Wisdom? Do we have, can I tell you, hey, I took a course in advanced wisdom, so my wisdom is very advanced. No. It's funny, it's very funny that there's no institute of higher education in the world that I know of that has a Department of College of Wisdom or College of Wisdom. Not even the second best public university doesn't have it. So what happened? What happened? When writing my book on creativity, I checked the dictionary because of this key word, wisdom. Webster's says wisdom is the quality of being wise. Satisfied? That's practically cheating, huh? Yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that. So I gave him one chance and said, let's look at wise. Wise is characterized by wisdom. I kid you not. You can look it up for yourself, okay? So what happened? When I first saw this, I was rather frustrated and angry, and And then I talked to my friend, professor at Taipei, at Taiwan University in philosophy. And he said, actually in modern societies, particularly democratic societies, you're not supposed to define what wisdom is. And therefore that's what they did. You're not supposed to. Because wisdom is an individual thing. Everyone must find their own wisdom. And so there is no collective wisdom. And in a way, that's true and that's great. But in another way, we lose something because without a collective wisdom, how do we lead our lives? How do we judge things? There's so many things that happen when wisdom is out of the equation of our normal teaching. So, is it possible that most everything we have learned in school since we were kids is method? And there is no entity available to teach wisdom? If so, is it also possible that all of our education is learning on the periphery and that we have to tend for the center by ourselves? Meaning, target, right? Meaning, we're all learning on that periphery. And wouldn't it be so great if we could go to that center? And wouldn't that ground everything so perfectly? But for some reason, wisdom seems to be something that we assume that we will get. At Ann Arbor, at Michigan, I'm sure many of our teachers, they will try to impart their wisdom to their students, and I'm sure they do. But it's sort of random, it's sort of haphazard. There's nothing that can, there's nothing organized that can teach wisdom. In ancient times, why did disciples decide to spend their lives following these guys? Socrates, Shakyamuni, Confucius, to learn the only course they were offering, which was wisdom. And they would spend their whole lives learning this one course. And that one course does not exist today on our campuses or high schools, elementary schools. So in thinking of creativity, in splitting it up into two different tasks to learn, I split it up this way. So we're talking about wisdom, method, life and art. In Chinese, I think the word for creativity is so perfect, 创作, because it's 创 and it's 做. 做 is to do, it's to be creative. And the to do is all about method, okay? It's about idea and execution, it's about content and form. So when we think of a story to tell, then we think of how to tell it. You see, wisdom, method, question, answer. Basically, creativity is posing a question and finding the answer, okay? Posing the question needs a lot of wisdom. Or, if you don't have much wisdom, then you don't pose very good questions. And then you don't get very good answers. And you don't get a very good product. And that's like a lot of the things that we see from Hollywood or whatever. A lot of stuff that is not really, the question itself is flawed by the wisdom of the person making the question. And once that is flawed, then there's not much you can do with the method to fix it. So Gertrude Stein on her deathbed, asking what is the answer, and in that case she said, what is the question? I love this quote, of course, about life, right? So don't let this intimidate you, but this is what it eventually became, my chart on creativity. This is a path to creativity, and I won't spend time talking about it because it really takes a whole quarter or semester to talk about it all. Basically, I have split it up into the two domains, and then there are different tasks. On this side, we learn wisdom. On this side, we learn method. The main thing about wisdom is how to see. And the main thing about method is to learn how things work. So I have set it up so that in the end, it's all integrated. because there is wisdom in method and there is method in wisdom. Just like there's life in art and there's art in life. It's all together. But as we learn, we definitely have to we have to split it up and think of things this way. So, a little bit more about wisdom. What is it? I would call it, if forced to, a knowing. The wisdom is a knowing. It's an awareness. It's seeing, it's really seeing. Because you can have an MBA, but also you can just know things. The other day a student asked me, how do you know if a play is going to be good or not? And my only answer would be, I know, because I know. And if once a student gave me an outline to a play, and I would say, you know, you should change the topic. Why? This isn't going to work. You know, so I know what works and what doesn't work. And that is the wisdom of my craft. And if you're a CEO, the wisdom of your craft is whether some entrepreneurial decision will work or will not work. It's that simple. That's wisdom. In creativity, that's wisdom. A quote from a Buddhist monk and poet. If you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, we cannot make paper. If we look even more deeply, we can see the sunshine, the logger who cut the tree, the wheat that became his bread, and the logger's father and mother. Without all of these things, this sheet of paper cannot exist. In fact, we cannot point to one thing that is not here. Time, space, earth, the rain, minerals in the soil, the sunshine, the cloud, the river, the heat, the mind. Everything coexists within this sheet of paper. This is, to me, a beautiful paragraph about creativity, about connections, about being able to see how everything is connected. And if you can see how everything is connected, it's pretty easy to be creative, I must say. Because that's what we do. We connect things together. And people like Thich Nhat Hanh, they can connect everything in the world, in life, together. And when you can do that, you understand how none of us are really separate from everyone else. It's all one big thing. We're part of one incredible thing, which is our existence. Our wisdom is cultivated through our view. So we need to cultivate our view. How do we see the world? And we can see that there's a driving force behind all of our actions. Kandinsky would call it the inner necessity. Why? It's the why. Why are you here? Why are you sitting here? Why are you at Michigan? Why are you a student in Michigan? Why are you living at Michigan, at Ann Arbor? All these whys are part of your view that create your personal wisdom. Different driving forces yield different results, and in fact, the driving force inside you may be the single most important element of one's creativity. Instance, a student came to me with an outline about a play about this absolute jerk. And I read it and I said, who is this guy? And she said, my ex-boyfriend. And I said, okay, so you're going to write this play about this jerk, so who do you want to see it? And she said, he has to see it. He has to be in the audience. And I said, okay, may I not see it? Because I'm not interested. You see what I'm saying? The driving force, the motivation for what you do creates a lot of the result that happens. So if you're motivated, let's say we see a film and we say, wow, that was a 大烂片, that was a real catastrophe, what terrible film. And if we talk about motivation, we can say that, hey, they weren't trying to make a great film. They're trying to make money, you know? So they will absolutely agree with you. Yeah, we made a terrible film, but we made money, okay? So that if that is what you're thinking of, that the motivation creates so much of the criteria to judge the result. So, Think about it. As I'm often asked, how do I know the market so well? And I tell them I don't. How could I know the market? All I can do is do the best I can at the play that I'm writing and directing. And maybe if it's successful, then it has a market. And if not, I don't care either, because that's not my motive. My motivation is not for the market. Another instance of a driving force is a directing student who wanted to direct Chekhov, and I asked why. And he said, because I know nothing about him. Good luck, right? It sounds like such a valid, it sounds so valid. I'm sure there's some graduate student here, and your PhD dissertation, and you want to write about some very obscure thing, and your professor says, why? Because I know nothing about it. It sounds totally valid, but I'm sorry. That's not a very good motivation for me. Finally, I'd like to take you to an example that I think will make you understand motivation. I'm always moved by seeing the paintings of Fra Angelico. Whenever I go to Florence, I make a point to see this one in person. It's at his monastery. He painted it. He painted the walls in that monastery too. And Vasari, the art historian, said about him, he would never take up his pencil until he had first made supplication, and he never made a crucifix, but he was bathed in tears. So we're talking about sacred art. We're talking about art that is made with so much faith and so much sincerity. And for who? Not for him, for his fellow practitioners to put on the wall. Okay. I remember one year I was on an airplane and I was just reading Newsweek, and I came across a page that said, they are the ones with the intellectual and operational sophistication to stage simultaneous events. And I thought I was reading a dance critique or some sort of performing arts critique. But I was so shocked when I learned what I was reading about was this. So let's go back to that. These are the terms you use when you're talking about an artist, right? And this is what happens. So creativity is the tool for the artist and the terrorist. And wisdom and method. The method of this is mind-boggling. The method behind, if you look at how the whole thing was set up and how it was executed, when it first happened, I didn't dare say anything because I would really get criticized. But I remember seeing my friend, he's now departed, Edward Yang, the filmmaker, Yang Decang. We looked at each other and we said, yeah? Oh, wow. And in those yeah, wows, there was like, really? Yes, this guy, he was an artist. He should have gone to film school. Unfortunately, he didn't. And what screwed him up was his motivation, you see. So if we talk about wisdom, I want to talk about motivation. Your motivation is your wisdom. Why you do things, that's your wisdom. And that's what changes everything. So do you want to make a gift for the world, or you want to make garbage or destruction? And creativity can do both, and certainly has over time. And it is what drives you that decides. And with that, I'm ending my sort of formal talk, and I would like to welcome Bright on the stage to continue. Thank you. Are you mic'd? Yeah, you're mic'd. Yeah. Oh.
Wow.
You can't see me here. Can we move this, Keith? Or
Who can move the?
Or let's move forward,
Move
right?
the chair,
Yeah, let's move us forward. Then we're going to be okay. As a stage director, I'm always fooling around with sightlines, right? Yeah. Okay. There we
Can
go.
you hear me?
That's good. Better. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you hear me too?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's a great talk. You know, as a composer, musician, we think about creativity all the time. And this is really eye-opening. I remember during your talk, it's something I read a long time ago that somebody used a very simple metaphor. That inspiration is like managing an antique store. You have to have the door open all the time. You don't make the sale until, you know, if you don't make the door, if you don't open the store, and you cannot make the sale. But you open the store, you might, for days, you might not make the sale, but one day you make the sale, they'll compensate for all the rest of the time. Yeah. Now that's a very, actually very shallow way of thinking, but in a way, it's very...
Makes sense.
In a way, it happens in life. It's just very descriptive of what that is. Of course, we think about classical Chinese. We have experts in the audience about writing creativity, how to write poem. You know, there are a lot of things we can learn. As a composer, musician, that I learned a great deal. One of the things they often say is, it's called 师古不泥古。师就是老师的师，古古代的古，不泥古，泥就是泥土的泥。Essentially, you learn from the past, but you don't imitate the past. But that's the first part of it. The second part is called 立意为上. Your ideas, your inspiration is the most important thing. Now, these two are, to me, that's my question, leading to my question. Okay. Sorry, it's a long introduction. No. So, to me, those two are related closely. The first part, if you learn from the past, because you have to build on what has been done, that it doesn't care, I don't care what profession, every profession is the same. To be creative, you have to know what happened. Einstein has to know what people have done before him, even for Einstein. So, but you don't imitate, you don't, otherwise you become, if you only have the second part, which is I read one time in a fortune cookie, it says, they said, if you only have imagination and no learned knowledge, you're like a bird without feet. Which is also quite interesting. So, 立意为上, and a lot of people also in our business that being creative, that bread and butter of our profession is creativity, and they just think about 立意为上, find the next new thing that will startle people, will spark, and then make a career out of it. They don't think about the first part, 师古, how do you learn the past, and then how not to imitate. That's also very important. So if you only do learning the past, then you become 师古泥古. You learn from the past, but you also imitate the past, which also happens a lot.
Yes.
I'm sure in every profession.
Yes.
So all this, how do you see all this as a combination?
I see it perfectly fitting into the two sides, right? Because if you to learn from the past, this is all about method. You know, we need to learn from the past, and as a playwright, as a director, I need to know everything that everyone has ever done in my field. And that will help, that will give me tools, that will hone my craft. I will learn many lessons, and also, of course, that will cross over into wisdom. But then also what you're saying, then to, like the bird without the feet, the flying part, that's the wisdom part. You see, and then the feet, you need the feet to land.
To land.
Yeah, and you need the feet to land, and landing, it's all about method. Yeah, I think what you also said about wanting to find the next great thing, for me, that is normal, but can the person think about their motivation for wanting to do that. And that will also figure in the results of what they do. Now we find many great, great in terms of influence, inventions in our recent lives have really had a great influence, like Facebook, like these things. And then you realize that these guys who invented these things really didn't have the complete view about what these things could do in the wrong hands or in the normal hands of humanity, which, as we all know, isn't quite that smart, or maybe too smart for itself. And so what's going to happen in the future? I was speaking to the business school yesterday and saying something about on these lines of creativity, and that you have to have a view, you have to have a vision. When you are inventing something, when you're thinking of the next great thing, if it's only for the motivation of making money, then you may be creating monsters that we're going to have to deal with in the future. You know, even this thing, which makes life so convenient, you know, I have a feeling this is the monster. This is going to, you know, sooner or later we're all going to be controlled by it. You know, and next time I'm here at Michigan, I'll be talking like this, and you'll be listening like this, you know, and we're never going to even look at each other again, you know. So I don't know. It's. I hope you can see what I'm talking about with these two different aspects of creativity, yeah. And for us, there was no way we could know that we had to split it up. We just had to learn it all sort of together. Do you agree?
Yeah, they are hand in hand. You know, one enhancing the other.
I remember once I was speaking with Fu Cong, the pianist, and I asked him what was he up to. He said he was judging these piano competitions in Europe, and I said, "How are the youngsters?" He said, "Incredible, incredible fingers. Never heard anything like it." And then he said, "But where is the music?" And
yeah, that's very important.
And that's what I'm saying, method and wisdom. Where is the music?
Yeah, that's very much in my mind. There are two, you know, the method is also very important. Being a pianist or violinist or composer, you have to be able to learn the notes and play the notes, and
you have to have the chops.
The
right?
chops, yeah, you have to learn that. That's the method. And I have, you know, I have a colleague in my school, Richard Aaron, who also teaches at Juilliard. He's perhaps the most important cello professor in this country. All the important cellists has to kind of go through his studio. And I asked him, I said, could you tell me how much time in your classroom, when you're teaching, we have one-on-one teaching, and sometimes it's master class and all that. And how much of your teaching that you actually spend on teaching them how to practice? What would be the percentage? And he said 99%. Okay, now
how to practice.
How to practice. So he also talks about inspirations, things like that, but very little. I observed that. But mostly he's teaching about that part, because that's the first step. If you want to write a classical Chinese poem, you have to learn the stuff. You know, you have to memorize it, understand what, you know, all these reference points in classical writing. So when we worked together on Dream of the Red Chamber, and one of the reasons, of the many reasons, but one of the reasons I was very excited to have you be the director, not only because you're a stage director, you do great shows, you're a writer, you also, you know, a great writer yourself. And I also went to see Dream of Dreams.
Oh, you saw Dream Like a Dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I captured you for 8 hours.
Yeah, that was very good, and you even brought lunch for me in between. But in any case, but one of the reasons, and I think I read many of your writing, that I say this guy knows the classical Chinese. He knows it's both. You know, we were talking about yesterday that people say bilingual. He's truly bilingual. In other words, when he talks Chinese, he might have a Taiwanese accent, but he's a decent, authentic Taiwanese. But then when he speaks English, he's totally English. So he's not only well versed, it's a simple statement, but it's somebody who is really deeply rooted in both cultures, West and East. And I thought that was the ideal person for us, and I was right, I have to say. So I think that kind of thing, knowledge, the method, and creativity, and of course during the time that we worked together, that many of the ideas that he gives suggestion to how to not only to present the show, but also add depth to what we had originally conceived. So that's, it is to me, that's very important. Well, I must say, when I was reading let me finish this. Sure. When I was reading your plays before I engaged you, that I was thinking about as the guy is also a philosopher, and that is very important because Hong Lo Meng, as you know, has a lot of philosophy in it, among other things.
No, I was saying we had a great time working together. Me directing the opera and just seeing how this incredible composition came from Bright's mind. And the first choice he made was to get David Henry Hwang as the writer of the libretto. And strange choice indeed, because David had never read Dream of the Red Chamber. And it turned out, I mean, for me, I will say that's the perfect choice, because he has the ability to write the libretto, but he's never read the original. And how many people can you find who are like that?
Because he read after he got the job.
Of course, yes, of course. But meaning
before,
that he had a clean mind, because, as you know, Dream of the Red Chamber is the icon of Chinese literature, and it's been interpreted and overinterpreted and analyzed until, really incredibly. So I think David had a very fresh take on how to do it. My input sometimes was extremely small, so small that I remember coming to Bright and saying, "Can you add a fermata here? Just give me, meaning, can we rest 2 more seconds here?" He'd say, "Why?" "Because I got to get this guy off." It's just very practical things to do with method. We need to get an actor off and need to get a piece of scenery on. Can you write a longer, I kept telling him I needed that, remember, the longer part for the boat to come in at the start. And I didn't want to infringe on Bright's concept, because, as you know, music is structure. And a piece of music, if it's 1 minute long, it has a certain structure. If I asked, can you make it longer to 2 minutes, it changes everything. It changes so many things. And Bright was so gracious to say, well, he would first ask, why do you need this? And I would explain, because I want the entrance to be this way. He said, well, that's not what we thought. Okay, but that's what I thought, what I think, and that's where we have to talk. And I had the good fortune that David and Bright are both wonderful collaborators, meaning that we collaborate together and you have an open mind, open ear, open eye to be able to listen to what I have to say. And maybe you can't really see it before I do it, but at least you had a good idea, and so you went along with it.
It took me a little bit time to realize, because we, at the end of the opera, is, recently I wrote an article that in China, one of the most prestigious journal on Dream of the Red Chamber study, Redology journals.
Redology.
Redology.
Yeah,
it's called Cao Xueqing Yanjiu.
Yeah.
I wrote about this, that so how, at the very, for those of you remember the novel, in the first chapter, the monks and the Taoist priest, they were talking about going down to the earth. And they said, why do you want to go down to the earth? They said, there is this stone and the flower. that went on, and Wilk have this incredible sadness in their love affair, and we need to 我们要去了结，把它这个事了结一下 which we're going to end this thing. So to us, to me, David wrote all the words, but he insisted on I be listed as a co-director, co-librettist, and because I know I read Chinese and I pre-read, and I was a fan as a Hongmi. So, like you said, David was very good. That the fact that he didn't know, he didn't have the baggage of what Hong Lo Meng is supposed to be, and so, but we thought the end of the opera should also be end of the novel, which we still don't know what Cao Xueqing had in mind, was that when Dai Yu dies, because the story is finished. When Dai Yu dies, means the boy and the lovebirds is finished. So we arranged a drowning scene. That then she sings that with the a cappella chorus, and then she sings that I'm here to pay back my tears, and my tears dry now. I'm time to go, essentially. And this ending, he walks and he staged an incredible, beautiful drowning scene. That just disappears, and after she sings the last line, and the opera ends there. And and what he did was at the very beginning, we're talking about the boat scene there. Added 1 minute. He asked for 1 minute. He said, "I want to bring Dai Yu into the scene because the first scene is the prologue, which you have the stone and the flower, how to talk to the monk and." The monk turned them agreed them to bring them down to the earth, Hongcheng. So and then he transformed them in front of the audience. How it was transformed, walked into the mirror and become down to earth. And then the second act is in Daguanyuan. So I mean the second scene, which is the Act 1, Scene 1. And there he decides to bring Dai Yu on a boat and flowing with water. And that reflects the book ending at the end for this was really a genius touch, I must say.
No. You had already written it in the structure. I just made it a little longer.
But he says he wants to see there's a process. It's very important in theater that you see.
And
you
also,
cannot just talk about it.
You see, and then you have to do also, because what Bright was saying, I gave me memories of staging that last scene, and I thought, and we talked so many ways of how does the main character drown, how do you stage a drowning scene, and we wound up doing it actually very simply. So if you haven't seen it, we did just have the ballet dancers using this very thin cloth, blue, and just waving it. And so as she is singing this beautiful aria, she's moving downstage, and then the cloth gets higher and higher until she finishes and it envelops her. But that's not enough, because when the lights change, we draw the cloth away, she's gone. Okay, that's the magic of it. And to make that happen is really complicated. It's a lot of know-how, it's a lot of method, because we have to identify where on the stage we can cut a hole and then build an elevator and then get her to that hole, because she's singing, right? How do we get her to that hole? And then on cue, she goes down the hole, we cap it, and we draw away everything, and it sounds and looks so natural. And that depends on the music, that depends on the lighting, depends on everything you need. Just, it's a lot of method. That's what I want to say.
Well, that was an amazing touch, and became. And the other thing we talked about, and I told Stan, we told Stan right at the beginning, is that we try to find the reasons to, because an opera is not like not like a novel. Opera is not even like a theater.
Yeah.
When you reduce the opera libretto, which is the play of the libretto, if you read through like a play, it's probably half an hour quickly. So you have to leave a lot of room to for music
what
to
did we
tell
say?
the story.
Dream of the Red Chamber is how many times longer than War and Peace?
3 times
Okay,
long.
3 times longer than War and
And
Peace.
it's 500 characters, people count it. So
So if you want to be true to the novel, you want to do an opera that's maybe like, what, 500 hours or something like that.
yeah, so
You know, yeah.
so TV series can't even
Yeah.
bring justice to the story, to the novel. So doing opera, we have to think about what to cut, what do we keep as a part of the story, and so one of the many things that we did is to think about, to be faithful to the original idea of Cao Xueqing, and the center of the story is this triangle, a love story. But one of the most important point of departure for us was actually, I said, I want people to cry. If I can bring one person in the audience that cry every night, because the San Francisco Opera is 3,500 people every night. I said, if 35 people all crying at the same time, that might not be a good idea. But at least one person can cry. And I think we did that, and
we
we went to Hong Kong, we went to China, toured in China, and every night at least one of the people that crying. And one night in Hunan, in Changsha, where we opened a newly built opera house, my wife was sitting to an old lady who's never been to opera, and she was crying.
And we're doing this in English, by the way.
In English.
Yeah.
And she didn't know my wife was sitting next to me, and to her. And she said, you know, my son bought this ticket, very expensive ticket for me, just for my birthday, and to enjoy Hong Lou Meng, an opera. And she said, it's so sad, I'm crying from beginning to end. So it's somewhere like a middle way through the first act, and she's been crying all night, and including during the intermission. So I think we succeeded that way, that our approach is very important, to make it touching, make it moving, because that's what, to me, that you talk about arts and method, and it's very important. But it's just like you talk about Fu Cong, about where's the music.
Yeah.
That's the soul.
That's the soul. That's the wisdom of it.
That's the soul. That's the wisdom, and that's the. You know, sometimes we can look for, we can inspire the wisdom, and that's also tricky, because how do you teach that?
Yeah, it's like I'm a jazz fan, so when you listen to jazz, it's like you have it or you don't. If you don't have that soul, you don't have that wisdom, it doesn't matter how crazy you play. It just doesn't make sense, you know. I think we should open up for some
But
questions.
let me finish. I
Sure.
think the secret is everybody has creativity.
Yes.
Everybody
I
is.
believe deeply in that.
Deeply. Everybody has that within themselves, and it's how you're. To me, the method is, if you develop the method to get your wisdom, it's just to you be free, without hinder.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So you kind of go without, because you learn how to play the piano. The reason is you can express the music and freely, and to reach the audience.
But some people learn the piano not to express the music, but to express themselves. And that's what I'm saying. That's the difference in the motivation that makes different results.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and that is the personal wisdom, or unwisdom, if we might say. Yeah.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes for questions. Yes.
Jamie.
Earlier you mentioned the possibility of a department of philosophy nowadays.
Department of Wisdom, you're saying? Yeah.
Department of Wisdom.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering, if a department of wisdom did exist, then
Ah.
how should wisdom be taught?
Okay.
Wisdom is so individual.
Yeah.
Can it be taught?
I'll repeat the question. Yes, our very bright student here is asking, if we had a department of wisdom, how would you teach wisdom? What would it be?
She probably wants to register to.
Yeah, I bet so. You know, I try to tackle that question in my book, and using things that we can understand. Because if you talk about systems of wisdom, then you would talk about maybe Buddhist wisdom, and it would get a little messy because you're talking about religion and things like that. But I'm trying to make it simple. Is can you see your own mind? And as human beings, we have the unique ability to see our own minds. We can actually observe ourselves when we're thinking. Okay, that's supposedly that's an ability that only human beings have. And so if we can observe ourselves and we can see how our thought processes are we think so much in tune with how our habits are, you know, thinking becomes we're all on automatic pilot, you know, we don't really decide what we want to think, we just think. So how do we change that thinking? This is part of wisdom. These are all the things that are part of wisdom. How can you change the way you think to a more resourceful way of thinking or a more compassionate way of thinking? And that is, then you go back and you see all the patterns of your habits. And where did you learn all your habits? And then you will start seeing what all these things that make up you and your individual path. And so maybe perhaps that is a way to start to approach wisdom. I don't know, if someone would dare to get a Department of Wisdom started, you know, I think I'd have a few things to say, but it'd be difficult, really. Yeah.
Because that's something you cannot method you can.
Yes, you can
grab.
nail down. You can nail down.
You can nail down
Yeah.
what it is. You can list. This inspiration is something that somewhere floating, like they said, as cloud.
Yeah.
You know, there's somewhere.
But going back to your metaphor of the antique shop, I think what I'm saying is that, yeah, you leave the door open to the antique shop, but you also can find a way to bring people in.
Yeah,
you know, that's the wisdom part of it.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes, we had. So yes, you. Yeah.
So if you
We have a
graduate
mic here. Yeah.
From the School of Wisdom, are you then a wizard?
WIS, wizard. How about?
The method you showed with the chart, the large chart,
Yes.
it reminded me of a system devised by a Russian named Altshuler for inventive. It was called the theory of inventive problem solving.
Oh, I
And
haven't
the
come across
Israelis
that.
took that and made it into a thing they called structured inventive thinking. And then a company made an app for it.
Cool.
So
I'd like to see that.
Essentially, it forces the investigator to examine his problem, which is a physical or electrical problem or a hydraulic problem, by looking at every possible aspect of physics that can be associated with it. And so there is an app.
So you exhaust all the possibilities
It
and you come
forces
to the
you
answer.
to do that, yes. It forces you to make those connections. And it's,
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I don't know it. I will look into it. But you know, when I talk about wisdom, that is a knowing that can bypass that. You can just know that.
well, that's the thing about engineering is there's much that is empirical and much that is theoretical. And you can't know the
But I'm sure
empirical
there's a
except
lot of
by-
problem solving,
Yeah.
right? And then to find the problem, that is what I'm talking about, is the wisdom of it. You see, if you can see problems, that itself is wisdom. Yeah.
That's the same thing. Yeah, just to follow that the same thing that we teach engineers, medical students, lawyers about creativity, or teach them arts. Creativity in arts, it's not the purpose is not to turn them into Beethoven's or Picasso, but let them witness the creativity. How? Because creativity is, for artists, is it's bread and butter. We do this all the time. Although each one of us has different ways of dealing with it. But it's something that we share in common. And that is the creativity that we believe is important in every profession.
Yeah.
And it's, otherwise, you become a bookworm even if you be an artist. Imitate the past only.
Yeah. There was a question behind? Yes, here. And then later we'll get over there. Yeah.
Thank you. So I do have a question on whether wisdom can be taught or not.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's assume that wisdom can be taught, then let's say, then that means that wisdom itself can be analyzed and can have like, okay, you have to do, first you have to do this and that, like after a series of tasks you can learn the wisdom. Then that means essentially artificial intelligence can learn wisdom as well. If wisdom itself can be
that's a
taught,
good point.
then wouldn't that be scary?
I don't know if that's scary or not, but it leads me to maybe spend a minute and explain a little bit of what I wrote about in my book about also drawing from Buddhism, which has a very elaborate system of logic. If you study Buddhism, you have to study the Indian logic. And we talk about 8 consciousnesses. And the 8 consciousnesses, the first 5 are easy to define. The sight, the smell, the ears, it's the sensory things. The 6th consciousness is when these sensory things stick on to some outside external thing. So like, I'm seeing you now. That's the 6th perception. The 7th now is the moment when I recognize you or I put a label on you. Okay, so what's your name?
Yining Chen Yining.
Yining. Okay, so I say, in that one moment I say, Chen Yining. Okay? Now, in my theory, it's between the 6th and the 7th. There's a gap. And that gap is like a moment that is so fast. But if we can access that gap opens up to an incredible openness. And in that openness, things connect to each other very simply, very easily. Okay, so it's the moment before you attach a label onto something. And unfortunately, human beings are conditioned to attach labels onto everything. And I think this is Darwinian. This is something that has to do with evolution, that we need to recognize things in order to survive. But what I'm saying now is before you recognize the thing, can you see the thing for what it is, purely? Just see it. Just see it without putting a label on it. And then, if you can, then that thing itself is freed. You're liberated. You liberate it to become like what I'm saying here. This thing, oh, it's an incredible gadget. No, it's not a gadget. Gadgets are labels that we put on it. This is just something. And this could also become something else once we liberate it from its label. So these are the things that I talk about when I talk about wisdom. And it's a maybe you would think it's a more narrow definition of wisdom, but it's part of the bigger picture I'm speaking of. Yeah. There was a question over here in the back there. Yeah. Yes, you. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh. And then you,
Thank
okay?
you.
Then in front, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions.
Hey.
The first one is, what do you see between the relationship of philosophy, wisdom, and also religion? The
Okay.
second one is, how do you see the commercial world and its impact on arts?
The commercial?
The commercial world.
Okay. And its impact on, okay.
Thanks.
Philosophy, I think religion, these are all words, and sometimes we use them wrongly. I think I want to talk, just to give you a simple answer, I want to talk about wisdom without the context of religion or philosophy. I think we just want to talk about how to know, how to see and how to know, how to really see things for what they are. And then the knowing of making connections. I think this is, if we limit our discussion to creativity, I think we can go without philosophy and religion, okay, because it gets complicated. Now, the commercial world's influence on art is tremendous, and we try to avoid it as much as we can. But sometimes, because in particular, my work is often seen as commercially successful. Not always, but it is often. And that's why people ask me why, how do I know the market? But that is the thing, is that unfortunately, our business, it has to have a commercial aspect. Ever since ancient times, a play, a theater piece, you need an audience, you need to spend money to make clothes, you need to spend money to make props, no matter how simple they are. In the theater of Dionysus in Athens, you needed to build that theater, you spend money. So there's always a budget that needs to be out there, and then you need to find money to pay for it. So that's the reality of our business. Opera is the most expensive toy that I think we can probably dream up of. You know, it's so expensive to do opera. So these aren't necessarily the commercial world, but these are our realities, our economic realities that we must deal with. Now, whether or not we can make art that makes money, you know, that normally is not in the minds of a true artist. If that is in the mind of the true artist, the motivation gets warped, and then the work gets warped. Yeah, in front of you, yeah. And maybe this is the last question, because we only have...
I'm
yeah.
so fortunate. So I have a question
Later.
about the motivation that you talk about. You said that they are like intrinsic, and I think like as a human being, we are biased and have our own preference. So as a student in scientific world, we're trained to be like to interpret our data like very carefully. Don't let us like our preference to influence that. So as an artist, how can you make sure that like the message you deliver to the public and the society are, as you said, appropriate? And how can you like? Yeah, that's my.
I don't think I said anything about a message being appropriate. I think I was saying the solution, the creative solution must be appropriate to the task. Now, what is appropriate for society, I was not dealing with. So I'm not quite sure of your question, because motivation definitely is something that cannot be measured. All right, as a scientist, I hope you can maybe invent a machine that can that can gauge our motivation. I don't think that's possible. And motivation, even in a court of law, is not applicable. You can't say that this person was motivated to do that. You only look at the results. So this is something to me, though, that is very revealing. If you are able to ask the question to yourself, why are you doing what you're doing? Not just an artist, okay? As a scientist, why are you doing what you're doing? If you're really sincere and tough to yourself, you will find yourself really at war with yourself, because you're going to find some questions you're not going to be able to answer. For instance, let me just go on for a moment. Why are you studying? Are you a student here? Yes. Yeah, okay. Why are you studying here? Because I want to get the best education possible. Why do you want to get the best education possible? Because I want to succeed. Why do you want to succeed? Because success is the measure that everyone goes by. Why is that? Why do you want to go by the measure that everyone goes by? Because I follow the crowd. Why do you follow the crowd? Because that's what I've been doing. And why is that what you've been doing? Because my parents did it, and they asked me to do it. And why are you listening to your parents? Because everyone listens to their parents. So why are you listening to them? Because everyone is listening. You see what I'm saying? So on and so forth, you go deeper and deeper, and you challenge yourself. With these questions on motivation can be really, really never-ending and really, really deep. You know, so I think when you just hear about motivation, because in English the word is I'm still not sure what word to use in my translation of my own book, because I think driving force, inner necessity, I'm toying with these words. But motivation in English also deals with like, oh, he was motivated to be an NBA player. You know, like you can use it in that sense, and we understand that motivated to be excellent. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about here. So I would also be very happy if you had some suggestions on which is the best word to use for an English audience. Yeah, yeah. 动机, yeah, 动机, yeah.
Wow, that was really an intellectual treat. So I would very much like to thank Professor Lai, Professor Sheng for sharing their creativity and wisdom with us. So please join me in round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.